Podcast. We have been gone for a week, but we are back with an awesome guest to kick off this week. We have Kristine Root, who is a brand strategist and agency leader and founder and chief strategy officer of Socha Branding. Kristine founded Socha Branding, a food systems branding and marketing agency that partners with natural, organic, and regenerative brands, nonprofits, and government programs across the food value chain. With over 20 years of marketing experience, she specializes in using deep research, consumer insights, and systems thinking to help purpose-driven food and agricultural companies connect with what they believe in with real market demand. Her work through Socha and Regenified sits at the nexus of soil health, CPG supply chain, and consumer perception, helping everyone from small artisan food makers to global enterprise CPGs scale with integrity. Kristine, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, why don't you take me back to the beginning? I gave a little bit of context here, but I feel like the evolution of how you came to your current speciality, I think, is going to be, one that's maybe a little bit more purpose-driven than some of the stories that we've showcased. So, can you tell me a little bit about where you grew up, what you study, and then how'd you get into kind of the marketing and agency life?
Sounds good. Yeah, it's interesting because my first thought when you said, let's talk about the beginning, I thought, how far do you want to go back, really? It goes back to my childhood and experiences I had as a kid. We had a giant garden as a kid. Now, I would say I grew up on a farm. We would sell the produce coming out of the garden to the grocery store. That My parents had off-farm jobs, so I just thought that was just our garden. But it was that, and my mom actually didn't love cooking food. So her answer for anything in the garden was you just wash a beet, you wash it and eat it like an apple. So I learned this real appreciation for real food and for digging in the dirt, for being outside as a young kid. Our backyard, right behind our backyard, was a cow pasture. I spent hours playing in that cow pasture, and some of those things were really formative. I didn't know that they influenced my values on food. It sounds crazy to say that right now, given everywhere I've gone and everything I've done, but that really was the very beginning of the formative years. I went on to study in college, and I thought I was going to be a corporate attorney. That was my goal. Got into school. I was studying at Gustavus, and I realized one semester in that maybe I was at the wrong school, or like something wasn't right. Ironically, it was a Cosmo quiz on the bathroom wall that gave me an indicator I should look in a different direction. And it wasn't changing schools, but it was starting to look in a different field. So the very last line of this Cosmo quiz, you answer all the things. It tells you all about yourself. The last sentence said, choose a career in the field of communications. I was like, what is that? I had no idea. So I looked at the guidebook and I found rhetoric courses. I found the communications major and I found rhetoric courses. And I just did a deep dive into rhetoric, which is the art of persuasion. It's understanding belief, behavior, and values and how to influence those things. And at that point, I'm now thinking I'm probably never going to have a paying job in my life because of this, but this sounds so fun. So I did it anyways.
I love it. I just I have not as a farm to table experience as you, but my mom was early to kind of the organic food movement, and we would shop at co-ops and stuff like that. And I always thought, oh, this is so annoying. Why can't I just have regular food like all the rest of the kids? And I'm so grateful for that experience. And we lived on 8 acres in Hartstein Island in the Puget Sound, and didn't garden as much back then. But I just incidentally visited my mom in Long Beach, Washington this weekend, and she has a little plot at the community garden in Ocean Park where she lives now. And every night, that's pretty much what we did. We would go over there, water the plants, pick a reusable bag full of food, bring it back to the house, wash it off, make a salad, make soup, make baked potato bar. But yeah, just it's interesting, like how your dynamic that you grow up and how your parents experience food can be very formative on you. And also, like in my case, it was like rebellion at first, but then eventual like just awe of like how forward thinking she was.
Well, Dylan, I'm always incredibly jealous when I hear that other kids' parents were super into the like natural and organic foods back then, because when I wasn't in the garden, we were eating pot pies and Twizzlers and, all of the worst processed foods.
Oh,
And so there was
wow.
this huge juxtaposition between the real food that came out of the garden and everything else I ate.
Yeah, that's wild.
So
All right, so you start to switch to this comms path during college, and then you graduate. What happens next?
well, I graduated a year early and I had one credit left. So, I mean, I could technically walk, but I'd have to finish that one credit. So I asked my advisor how, like, I'm not coming back and paying for another semester. That'd be crazy. How do I do this? And we set up an advisory. And I said, okay, great. What could I do during this advisory? He's like, I'd suggest you go get an internship. Go get an internship at an ad agency, and we'll create a project in relation to that, and that'll be your final coursework. So you'll take and apply what you're learning in your internship to a specific project that will demonstrate the growth that we need for you to be able to get this final credit. I'm like, that sounds great. So I went out and started looking for an ad agency, and that's when I figured out that everything I had learned actually does apply, which was like a huge relief. But I started working in the industry and really loved the agency world. I loved so much about what I was learning, so much of what I was doing with the research and the strategy and working with creative teams, but also helping clients solve business challenges. The what of it was super fascinating to me. But it wasn't very long. I was in my mid to late 20s when I started having an existential crisis, because I loved what I did, but I was asking myself, why am I doing this? I'd go to work to tell people that there's no joy without a BMW, and you find no meaning without Prada. And those just didn't seem like there were meaningful enough reasons to create the emotional appeal that I was trained to create through the work. And so I started really questioning my why. Why did I come to work? What did I want to accomplish in the world? What mattered to me? And some of those questions really started pushing me on this, kind of on a differentiated journey, where I started thinking about how do I use my skills and the training, what I learned, to do something that feels like it has purpose and value for me.
Yeah, that's cool. And then I think also during this entire time, even when you were, selling BMWs and designer clothes, you were getting pretty immersed in this, natural foods space from a personal perspective, and spending a lot of your free time kind of in these communities from just a passion point. How did that maybe have an effect on kind of thinking like, gosh, wouldn't it be cool if I could marry these two things together?
Oh yeah. My boyfriend came home. I was, now in my first year in my career, my boyfriend was still in college. He came home and he's like, hey, I just had this ethic class and we were talking about organics. I think it's really important. And I was like, what's that? Right. But it led me to go to the grocery store next time and look at the sad little case of organic produce where the carrots were all really wilty and twice the price. And I came home, I didn't buy anything, but I came home and I was like, tell me why we should do that again. But it then triggered me going down this journey of learning more. I started realizing, if I want to buy better quality food, I should look at where they actually care about that and focus on that. I joined a co-op, became a member of a co-op in Minneapolis, where I'm from. Then I went to a weekend conference. There was a conference called the Living Green Conference that I found, just looking for fun things to do on the weekend. And those things started really, Living Green Conference was all about sustainability, sustainable lifestyles. It looked at food, it looked at a lot of different things. But this is where like my connection and my values to food start. I see this whole gamut of all these things related to sustainability, and I'm magnetically drawn to food. I just like, it keeps pulling me over here. Some of those early childhood memories, the joy of being in the garden and being outside. I don't know what it was, but it unmistakable every time. Even in college, I studied abroad, and I did an independent study during my study abroad in college. And they said, pick one thing that's central to the Vietnamese culture, and you're going to write a 40-page dissertation. That's the primary deliverable. I had coursework and other things I was doing, but that was my big deliverable at the end of this study abroad. And I sat down with my advisor and I said, I don't think there's anything more important than food in Vietnamese culture. He's like, you're right. I mean, that is central to everything, but there's this constant trend of that. And so when I started getting into sustainability and green living, started shopping at the co-op, you're right. All of those things in my personal life started influencing my thoughts about what really brought me joy. I moved to Colorado and started getting involved in the slow food movement and leadership within slow food. I'd spend my weekends planning farm to table dinners with chefs and farmers, volunteering on farms to build fencing or sucker tomatoes. My kids grew up digging in the dirt. Not that we don't even have a yard, but they got a chance to do all of that out in these farms. And so it was really one day back in about 2016 when I said, oh my gosh, what if I could marry these two things? What if all of the work that I'm doing for food systems change by night and on weekends, I could spend all of my week dedicated to? I mean, how much impact could I make if I used those daytime hours in my business brain and what I do going to work every day to help companies grow? What if I just did that for the food systems people? It took me a couple of years after I had that thought to actually make it a reality and create Socha, but
yeah, that's interesting. So, there's a handful of other agencies maybe in the world who at least have clients in this a speciality, but did you go straight to the idea that like, this needs to be my own thing? I need to be an entrepreneur. I need to launch an agency and kind of lead this? Or did you ever think like, oh, maybe there's a client that I could go brand side, or maybe I could do this, within another agency that has similar values, or at least has a roster of clients that are kind of in this world, because it's a big leap from going from a practitioner to an entrepreneur. Just curious about that journey for you as well.
Well, I started my first business when I was still living in Minnesota. It was a wellness center. So I was not unfamiliar with being an entrepreneur. I had two business partners in that business, owned it and ran it for 8 years. It was fantastic. It was a wonderful experience. Having business with two partners, it was probably the best version of that experience you could ever imagine. So I had a really good base thinking of what it was like running a business from good experience. But I was here in Colorado at the time, living in Denver and working at another agency. And I again, loved what I was doing, but sometimes I would be delivering curry for sneakers from drones on the San Francisco Bay. And sometimes I'd be building a farm tour for Noosa Yogurt. So it could run across the whole gamut. And of course, I tried to build more food systems work into that. That was my first step was, how can we do more of that? But look back to 2016, and there also really weren't agencies that were specializing in a category back then. In fact, when I proposed the idea to a couple of my mentors who owned agencies, they're like, Kristine, that's incredibly risky. That is way too narrow. I mean, you can specialize in strategy and branding, but to niche that down into a subcategory of an industry is really high risk. I'm like, well, maybe, but it just wouldn't leave my thoughts. I was like, I think I just have to try.
I love it. So, the kind of the old adage I think now is, 2 clients is a conflict, 3 is a specialty. You saw really a rise of agencies, like you said, that would help with different disciplines, but even getting into really specific things like NFTs or esports or, lots of very specialty assigned, kinds of channels and expertise. But now I think you definitely do see agencies, whether it's founder led or just because they have an expertise, because they maybe came from the brand side, they really do think about, these specialty segments. So what was it like? You're not just going into food, you're going into even a more specific sub vertical within food. So tell us a little bit about, kind of hanging up your shingle and what were some of the early days like?
Oh man. So in the early days, I actually kind of thought maybe this is really a narrow bucket. Maybe I'm, although there's not a single client ever that I've said, go broad and wide, try and be everything for everyone. So I was following my own advice. But I did feel like it was pretty focused and narrow in the beginning. And the more I really started thinking about it and started working with clients, the more I realized there's a lot of diversity to the different clients that we're working with. So when I say food systems, we're really working with folks across the food system who are looking to build a better system. So that means we're working with farmers, we're working with nonprofits, we're working with brands, we're working with retailers, we're working with processors. these are all the players within this broader system, and they all have different needs. They all have different pressures. They're working within the same system, which is fascinating because we get to see the system from all the different lenses, which helps us build empathy for the complexities of all the layers of the food system. But it's actually huge. I mean, I don't know what the latest stat is, but over 50% of the US population is connected to the food system in some way, shape, or form. But you're right, we work with a subspecialty of that, and we're really focused on companies that are using food as a vehicle for social change. They, in some way, shape, or form, have mission-driven, purpose-driven work that are looking to use food as a vehicle for positive impact.
I love that. And then you did spend some time as CMO of Regenified. Who is that? Who and what is Regenified? And then was that like a fractional CMO type of a thing where you became their temporary chief marketing officer? Were they a client first? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Regenified was a client that came to Socha. We started working with them on the strategy and brand development to launch the branding. And in the process, they really had some great growth goals and a really good mission. It goes back to the farm level and systems change, and that really excited us. But it led into getting their brand ready, getting their strategy up and running, led into really a need to build out the marketing and growth strategy, and then create a plan and a team to make that possible. So I was running Socha as an agency and doing that work originally as their agency partner, but then flipped into a hat of an internal CMO role, running and building up the team internally for Regenified to kind of get them off the ground and launch that growth, until I had to flip back into the agency side because I just realized you can't really do that much.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what is food systems? Can you help me define that? Because you could be talking about food, regenerative farming, organic food. There's a lot of categories of food, but this is the first time I've heard of the idea of food systems. So could you maybe define that for the audience?
Yeah. So food system is all the pieces and part that it takes. This is how I define it. It's all the pieces and part that it takes to get food from where it's grown to the people who eat it. That's the system.
So it's the supply chain of the whole customer journey from dirt to mouth, essentially.
Absolutely. It's the ecosystem, and it's the microbes in the soil. It's the rain. It's the farmer. It's the farm hands. It's the trucking company. It's the distribution center or the grain elevator. It's the processor who mills that wheat into a flour. It's the brand who uses that wheat in a pancake mix. It's the, retailer who puts that product on shelf, and it's the consumer who goes to shelf to buy that product. It's all of those people, because we're all complicit in we're all connected. Something that happens in any part of that system impacts the rest of the system. You cannot separate them. We try to say agriculture is over here and CPGs are over here, right? But if you're a potato chip company and you need potatoes as a core ingredient to make your product, and there's some kind of a catastrophe that wipes out potatoes, you realize how closely connected you are to those farms, and their stresses are your stresses. And that's true of all of it. And we're even, I bring this all the way down to the consumer level, because at the end of the day, and we're starting to see this right now with GLP-1s, starting to manifest in a big way. If consumers' belief and their behaviors change, it impacts everybody else back through that supply chain, all the way back to the farm gate. So if consumers keep their calories down by 60%, the rest of that system is going to feel it. If they're changing what they want on their plate, the rest of the system is going to feel it. So we're all closely connected, and that's why I call it a food system. And so within that, I'm really focused on the natural, organic, and regenerative food system. It's the system that's building better food, using food in a positive way. But I call it a system, and that's how I define it, because I feel so passionate. We holistically.
I like that. It's funny, the insight around the GLP-1 situation. Obviously we've heard like Walmart is having, pricing pressure because there's less demand and stuff like that. But I was talking to a marketer the other day that says basically it's not just food, it's impulse purchases. So across the board, like if you think about what we do as marketers, trying to get people to act upon their impulse purchase desires, it's actually affecting all components of impulse purchasing, which is really interesting. So it's like this whole, a drug can, a pharmaceutical can have an impact across, our industry at large, and kind of the emotion that we tend to try and have an influence on. And I think there's like 29 weight loss drugs that are in the pharma pipeline right now that are trying to continue to capitalize upon, the success of GLP-1. So yeah, it's an interesting moment. Your specialty has always been in deep research and consumer insights. Was there anything new, or did you have to approach those disciplines from a new way when you kind of shifted from kind of the agency world that you and the clients that you were working on before to this sector? Did anything need to change or be updated?
I think maybe not so much because of a shift into the sector or a shift within the sector, but the system is changing so rapidly right now. We're in a time of accelerated changes across the board. And so I think, last year I was sitting down and looking at the agency and our focus and our goals. And I was thinking about when I had, reviewed that just 2 years earlier. And in 2 years, things shift pretty dramatically. And there's a lot more data and a lot more insights to help you create clarity. So I feel like we're always really looking at how do we understand this better? How do we understand the pressures? How do we do the work in a way that's relevant and timely right now to meet the needs? So it feels like it's constantly evolving and constantly shifting, but the core of the science of it is the same. I mean, our work is to understand market data, market trends, consumer behavior, consumer values, beliefs, and to understand how we can connect all the dots between those pieces to shift behavior, to shift purchasing, and nuances to how we do it, how we capture data, how we can do consumer interviews, how we can, technologies that are available for us to be able to do that. Those are changing. The ways that data can be captured out in the field is changing. The kind of information that can be measured and talked about in terms of quality and the education level of consumers is always changing. So one thing I will say is I don't think I quite realized this when I was reading that Cosmo quiz and shifted my career path into the field of communications, as Cosmo called it. But I didn't realize that I was signed on to be a lifelong learner. But you are. If you're working in this space, you have got to be committed to being constantly curious, never willing to just settle for what you know, but always ask the next question, challenge your own assumptions. And I think that, that's required if you work in marketing as a whole, because marketing is always evolving. But when you're working in food systems change, it feels incredibly important to always keep that open mind and always be questioning and reimagining how you do things and, the validity of that process.
I love this idea of food systems from the perspective of trying to understand, how all these things are interconnected. I feel like the storytelling in marketing and advertising as it pertains to food has followed this path quite closely. Even if you look at like Super Bowl work and the work that a brand like Lay's is doing in the Super Bowl, it's, not going and hiring some celebrity. It's talking about the farmers and the people who, put the potatoes in the hands of the folks that make, the potato chips, as the example that you gave before. How do you see food systems and kind of the farm to table movement, people caring about where their ingredients come from, but wanting to see interesting storytelling in the marketing and the explaining of that that is easy to understand and entertaining? How do you think about that farm to retail perspective when you're talking about upstream messaging and actually getting into channel and getting work out into the world?
Well, consumers' appetites are changing. That's one thing I will say, and not because of GLP-1s. They're changing from a values perspective. Consumers are what they care about, what they think about, and what they expect their dollar to do when they spend it is evolving. So we see a growing body, specifically when we're looking at food, we see a growing number of consumers who are really asking, what's in this for me, when they're going to shelf to purchase something. The other thing that's happening with consumers is they're overwhelmed with all of the messaging, and they've caught on to the fact that we as marketers can make anything sound great. We're hired to do, right? That's our job. And they're starting to say, okay, you can make that sound appealing, you can trick me into getting excited about that, but show me the proof. They're starting to ask for authenticity in a different way. And we see that. I mean, you even see that when you look at social content that's raw and less filtered performing better because consumers' appetite for things that feel real and authentic. And I think that, in that example you're giving about brands talking about the farms where it came from is just a level of validation and authenticity that is resonating with consumers because they want to see what's behind it, not just hear the cool slogan, not just see the flashy colors or the good headline. They want more proof. They still need it in bite-sized chunks, but they're willing to give you a short little snippet to capture their attention with a bite-sized chunk they care about, and then they're ready to hear the next answer. And so they want you to be able to take it deeper and deeper and deeper and back that up. And that's something new because consumers didn't need that level of complexity to understanding who they were purchasing and what they were supporting in the past, but they're increasingly asking for it. And we're, really a lot of the data, when you look at what's coming out around Gen Z and their values, you can see that coming so clearly through that research and what Gen Z is asking for. They want to know what's in it for me, but they also want you to be able to back it up and show me how you got there. Why does this matter? What does that mean? And how did you do this?
One of your core mandates is uncovering creative ideas that are driven by purpose to maximizing profit. A lot of times you think that profit maximization is something that private equity firms do and publicly traded companies have to do in order to, impact the bottom line. And it's done at the expense of sacrificing things like purpose. Can you talk about how purpose and profit maximization can actually go hand in hand?
They're essential. I mean, if you do an analysis of the companies that are performing and growing faster than other companies, if you just look at that globally, the companies that are growing faster are the companies that are taking a more values-based approach and applying sustainability practices into their business. Companies that have purpose grow faster than companies without. And that's because of what we were just talking about with consumers. And they're no longer willing, a growing percentage of consumers are no longer willing to just buy a product to fulfill a need. They want that purchase of that product because there are so many options. Take a baby stroller. There are so many options of baby strollers. Customers are asking, okay, well, which one's better? They're all functionally basically the same. Give me something deeper. And so perhaps just by the natural process of having so much product, different variety of product available, it's allowing consumers that ability to go deeper and ask for more. And consumers are starting to bring their values to the shelf. And so when I talk about companies building purpose, they're building their profits through purpose. It's tying into where customers are actually creating loyalty and where you can reduce friction and gain repeat purchases, gain followers, create champions and amplifiers of your brand is by having something deeper that you stand for and aligning that with a specific customer audience who cares about that. But the real motivation for me is honestly that if a company's not profitable, no one else is going to follow suit. And you have to remember that I am in this for my own purpose-driven work. I'm here because I believe good food can change the world. And our work to do at Socha is to build the brands that prove it. So if we can help purpose-driven companies be incredibly profitable by attaching that purpose to the values of the customer set that they serve and getting the support of those customers, that motivates other companies to lean in and operate with values at the center of their company rather than just for efficiency, which is the other model we have in our system, is efficiency at all costs for profitability.
What's the single biggest gap between what natural food founders think that modern shoppers care about versus what actually drives them to put a product in their cart?
Oh my gosh, that's so interesting because there are a lot of different customer segments, and different customer segments have different drivers that are ultimately the trigger that are going to get it from from an interest into a behavior. And I think when we look more broadly at the natural and organic shopper, I think a lot of times founders, we know that taste matters. But I think a lot of times founders step over an understanding of how taste is not a concrete, measurable attribute. It's very, I can't think of the right word right now, but it's all perception. And so I think a lot of times, when we keep hearing the message again and again and again that taste is the most important thing, if it doesn't taste good, consumers won't buy it, we lose the understanding that you can persuade consumers to believe a certain thing about taste. And we forget how important the storytelling around it, because if you look at it, products on the market, the one that's winning or making the most sales isn't always the highest quality or the best tasting product. Sometimes they have the best marketing.
Yeah, and taste is something that you can't influence unless you can at least drive trial or consideration, right?
It's subjective.
You might never know. You might never. And yeah, you're right. Like taste is differentiated between palates, honestly. Like some people think things taste amazing and some, don't like something that somebody else thinks really tastes great. So yeah, that's an interesting dynamic. Whether you're communicating dairy sustainability, water conservation, or soil regeneration, these technical supply chain topics can easily overwhelm an everyday consumer. What's your framework for turning a complex, data-heavy farming narrative into a 3-second hook or something that can fit on a retail shelf?
I think the short way to think about it is, what is the why that's going to resonate? And if you start, thinking about what is the why, and then you tell a snippet of the story that connects with the why, and then you back it up, like I said, you just need an entry point to get somebody's attention. You have 3 seconds. But once you capture the 3 seconds and they've made a small yes, you can get them to the next step to give you 10 seconds. And then if the 10 seconds creates another yes in their mind, you can get 30 seconds. And so it's really making sure that you understand the audience who's going to receive your message and the goal of what you're trying to achieve, and aligning that with the audience to make sure that if you know the motivation of the end person, that's your end consumer who's buying these products, you can take a very complex thing like milk supply systems and, dairy cattle health and soil health and all these like really technical elements, and you can break it down to something in 3 seconds that can get an end consumer to say, oh, that's interesting to me. And that's all you need is the permission to get them to say, yes, that's interesting.
That's cool. Through Socha, you've helped suppliers and farm funding organizations tell their stories to CPG buyers. Why are B2B suppliers historically bad at storytelling, and how can treating a B2B supply partner like a consumer brand unlock massive growth?
I feel like historically B2B brands haven't had to tell their story. It's been more about logistics and proximity. But as B2C brands have to specialize more and be for a specific audience, they also need to know that they have partners who can align and match those values, because that takes away friction. If you want to decommoditize something, you need to bring more depth and more story and more meaning to it. If you want to compete only on price and logistics, story is less important. And so I think those B2B players that you're talking about historically have really focused on logistics, and as things get more sophisticated downstream or downstream, we have more of those pressures to bring that sophistication back to the middle, so that these downstream players, if you're that potato chips company, in order for that potato chips company to be able to live their values and express all of those things, they need to be able to bring that transparency back and back and back through all the layers. And that's requiring them to ask more of those middle B2B brands, which is where if you're in that middle B2B space, you have a huge opportunity to tell your story better and be able to resonate and create more value for your end consumers. You're creating more value when you do that. So when you create that value for your customers, who are the brands, you give them more value that they're bringing to their customers, and everybody wins collectively in that system.
We talked a little bit about the fractional industry leadership alongside creative execution that you offer to clients through the Socha model. When an emerging food or CPG brand is scaling fast, how do you help a founder decide when they need a full-time in-house marketing team versus strategic advice? And, what do you think generally around the rise of this, fractional CMO trend, which used to be just called freelancers or whatever? It seems like it's a whole marketing ecosystem around itself to some degree.
Well, I think the reality is it's being driven by businesses' need for more flexibility. At the heart of it, there are so many more companies, specifically in the food system, are facing increasing pressures at higher levels than they have ever faced before. And as pressures increase, companies need more pressure release valves to be able to deal with those pressures in different ways. And I think because of that pressure, we see a rise towards fractional teams or fractional support, because it creates more flexibility than a traditional employee-employer framework, which has just more structure and creates a little bit less opportunity for change.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think you're right. I think it's smaller, leaner, but not just for the sake of efficiency, like you said. It's more for the sake for being able to adapt and have speed and respond to all these different changes, like you said, whether it's tariffs or a climate situation and a bad growing season. Like there's a lot of variables that affect this space.
Yeah. So you asked me also how we help people navigate that.
Yeah.
Every situation is unique. It's different. It's really starting by looking at what are your goals? What do you need to accomplish? What is your size? Where are you at as a business? At every different size, every different scale, with every different kind of future goal, there's a slightly different makeup of what that might look like. And so, we've done fractional services for quite a long time where we don't operate. And it's, I think, potentially because I've lived on the other side of this equation, running my own business, where every single thing that we did as a company to grow the company was an expense out of our own pocket. Literally, it was money we were spending. And that just gives you a different appreciation than being an employee in a company spending a marketing budget. When it's really you, your partners and your money and your future on the line, you ask the questions a little bit differently. And so it was that experience that started making me look at agencies and how agencies are structured and saying, are they really getting close enough into our business to care about our business, to understand our business, to bring us as much value as they can with their knowledge? And so when we're working with companies, it's always saying, okay, how do you have the capacity to have somebody internally who is the keeper of all of that knowledge, who then works with people who are executors? Or do you need an agency that can come in, who can extend the keeper of that knowledge role? And that's where we start looking at fractional versus agency services, is when you really need somebody who can invest enough in your business to understand how you operate, why you operate, what it looks like, things that go, we are technically a branding and growth marketing agency, but 80% of what we do is broader business strategy, because if you don't have that, the marketing is not going to be successful. But it's really looking at making sure that all those you know all of those elements and what the goals are, and then from there we help people define what can be an internal role and what can be a fractional role, and how can you navigate the levers between those to create success.
I think that's good advice in all sectors who are thinking about this dynamic of fractional and in-house, and how to engage with your agency in, new models where, we're maybe moving to outcomes versus time spent as like a unit of economic production. I think is pretty interesting. As more legacy CPG giants try to enter the natural and regenerative space, whether that's through launching their own brands or through acquisitions, how do you help mission first founders protect their authenticity when competing against deep pocketed corporate players who are trying to adopt their buzzwords?
Well, it's being able to bring its complexity. So it's embracing the complexity of the system and being able to bring that complexity simply to the market. So one thing we do with our clients is build out messaging architecture systems that allow us to create deeply resonant stories on multiple different layers and create lots of pathways into that narrative, so that you always are telling a cohesive story. You're always reaching consumers with the bite-sized nugget that they need, but you always take it deeper to be able to give more proof points. Because what happens and breaks down is if somebody's faking it, they can't back it up. And when you ask the next question, which consumers are doing more and more of right now, is asking the next, oh, that's interesting, tell me more. When consumers ask the next question, if you have a bland generic answer, you lose the track. So that's really how we help founders and in purpose-driven companies that are with and some of these companies are quite sizable. They're still independent. Most of them are still independent or operating independently within the system. But one thing that's very consistent about all of them is they're truly doing the work. These companies are investing in an immense amount of energy, both of their staff, their team, their emotion, and their work into doing things differently. And so it's mining that and really making sure that that becomes clear and visible, because a lot of the times the company, this is just what they do. This is just how they operate. But it's being willing to take how they operate and make that visible.
So looking down the line over the next 3 to 5 years, we always see trends that are starting to bubble up to the top, whether it's in food in general, dieting in general, or category ingredients in the natural organic ecosystem. Is there something that you think is about to explode? You and I connected originally over Expo, and it felt like the thing that was kind of on everybody's, mind was like protein. Everything needs to have protein and fiber. I felt like was like the trend of this year. And I don't think we're ever going to escape the kind of food fads or, the idea that kale is popular at one period of time and then it becomes unfashionable. Food is as fashionable or as susceptible to fashion, kind of waves as fashion itself. But I'd be curious, because you guys do so much work around insights and strategy, is there something that's coming down the pipe that you think, folks should be investigating if they have an authentic position or story to tell?
Yes. There are quite a few things that are coming together at the same time. And we actually wrote a report about it called The End of Cheap Food. So it's called The End of Cheap Food Report. And that report analyzes where we're at right now. It starts with a simple question. What problem was our food system designed to solve? Because if we can understand that, we can start understanding where we're at right now is like in the system. And so we went back in that report. We looked at the history of the food system. We looked at the context starting back in the 1930s, looked at policy and how that shaped and influenced consumer belief, behavior, values, supply chain development, the entire infrastructure. We looked at things across a bunch of different sectors. And so we didn't just look at CPG or food retail. We looked at ag policy, we looked at farming practices, we looked at soil health, we looked at consumer healthcare spending. We looked at share of wallet for dollars for food. But looking across all of those different sectors gave us a chance to say, well, wait a minute, what's happening here and where are things headed? So this goes like stepping above the proteins and the fibers and saying, where at a macro level is our food system heading? And we've been in a food system that has optimized by cheap calories, optimized for cheap calories, abundance at all costs. And we're starting to see the pressures of that abundance at all costs methodology, where we've been extracting so much and overproducing. We've been creating excess waste, but we've been creating a lot of pressure within that system of excess waste. We've been devaluing food systems. We've seen increasing rise in human healthcare. I mean, the rise of GLP-1s is really related to consumers being sick and tired of being sick. They want to feel better, and they're willing to do what it takes to feel better. And when, we've engineered food in a way that hijacks their system, that they feel like they have no control, and they're turning to a drug, a GLP-1, to give them control back. That's how much consumers are signaling to us they're ready for change. And so when we look at all of that, what we see is there's new ways to communicate value. There's new motivations within consumers that we couldn't quite see before. They reported that they cared about those things, but their actions at shelf weren't matching that. But now we see, with the aid of things like GLP-1s, their actions are matching what they've said. And so we're seeing these really interesting, but what it's creating is an opportunity for better for you brands and companies that have truly, solid nutritional products coming out into market to connect with consumers and resonate on a different way. And we're also seeing opportunities for value to be measured within that system. So there's a whole trend towards nutrient density testing. Those little fact panels on the back of a label, when you pick it up, are generally auto-generated by standardized data that's in a data set. But we see more and more companies who are taking it to question and sending their products in for nutrient density testing to say, how are we actually performing against that? And what does that mean for our customers? We see a lot more brands who are starting to look at their sourcing and saying, well, wait a minute, how can we get a better nutritional source for our wheat? How can we get the highest quality, highest integrity ingredients that have the most nutritional value, the most flavor? And we see that's matching what consumers are saying over here, saying, look, I'm sick and tired of being sick. I want to feel better. I want healthy food. I want food that's going to give me energy, but it's also going to allow me to achieve all of my other goals. Here's my list. And so I think the biggest thing is that I see is a shift in what has historically been a system optimized for abundance and cheap food is starting to be optimized for human health and human outcomes.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's consumers. I mean, from my personal perspective, food and travel is always the last thing in my budget that I'm willing to spend. And the one thing that I'm willing to even go into debt if I have to is food. Hasn't happened often, but, as a small business owner, occasionally you hit those moments where you need to kind of go into the reserves a little bit. But like food is a non-negotiable, at least in my household. And I think you're right. I think, with GLP-1s or just, more awareness around, how much of an impact food, in addition to exercise, probably more than exercise has on overall, the way you look, the way you feel, but ultimately staying well and living a long, sustaining life. I think more of these are coming into context, and the trade-off of paying less now, but then having to pay more later, whether that's getting sick or just feeling poor. I think people are willing to make that investment on the front end more often now.
People are saying that they will spend more for food to offset the potential health risk of not doing it. So more and more consumers are putting food in that bracket of something they don't want to compromise their budget on.
Very cool. If you could give every natural food founder starting out today one non-negotiable rule about building a brand that lasts, what would it be?
Oh, well, that's a really hard question. One non-negotiable rule for every food brand. nobody's going to just know it if you don't tell them. You can't just build a great product and think that that's enough to be successful. You have got to toot your own horn or hire people that can toot your own horn. You have got to talk about what you're doing, because just the quality of the product will not speak for itself in a highly competitive, highly crowded marketplace.
I love that. Got to tell your own story.
Yeah, there is so much noise out there. As consumers, we're bombarded with hundreds of messages every single day. Even if we heard something, even if we tried something once, our chance of remembering it 3 days later is slim to none.
True. Well, Kristine, loved getting to know you and the work that you're doing in our kind of pre-conversations, and the conversation definitely hit expectations. I'm sure the audience is going to really enjoy this interview, especially those who care deeply about this topic and want to, unlock some of these insights. So you've got this amazing report that really focuses on a deep dive of over 100 years worth of food policy in America and the trade-offs that we've made and where the food system in general is heading. If folks want to download that white paper, that research, continue to follow along with your thought leadership, or just connect generally, where would you like to send people to stay in touch?
Check us out on sochabranding.com, SOCHA branding.com. We've got the report published there. You can get a downloadable PDF report copy from it. You can also reach out to us if you have additional follow-up questions. It's an interesting subject and I'm super passionate about it. We created the report just to help the industry. So any way we can support, we're always happy to.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on the show and spending some time with the audience today. And for those of you, if you are watching for the first time, don't forget to give us a follow or subscribe. That's how you'll get to see more great thought leadership with other marketing leaders like Kristine in the future. And if you're listening, an honest review on whatever podcast platform you're listening on is how we find a larger audience organically. So go ahead and do that if you would. And last but not least, if there's somebody out there in the food and wellness agriculture space who you think would enjoy the conversation that I had with Kristine today, or maybe somebody who is passionate about food or wants to get healthy and wants to think about some of these ideas, or just somebody who you feel would benefit from hearing the conversation that I had with Kristine today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I will wish you all a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Thanks again for coming on, Kristine.
Thank you so much.